My entire life, I was a carbon copy of my father, or at least the man I believed was my father. We had the same laugh, the same stubborn streak, even the same way of squinting one eye when we were thinking hard. It was our truth, the bedrock of our family. But a single afternoon, spent in the dusty silence of my parents' attic, shattered that truth into a million pieces. And those pieces were so sharp, they cut our family apart forever. The silence in my childhood home had become a physical presence after Mom died. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a thick, heavy thing that filled the rooms, stifling the echoes of laughter and conversation that once lived there. 6 months had passed, but the grief was still fresh, a raw nerve that twitched every time I walked through the front door. My father, Michael, moved through the rooms like a ghost, his footsteps hesitant, as if he were afraid to disturb the memories that were all he had left of her. It was a bleak, rainy Saturday in October. The sky was a sheet of unbroken gray, and a steady drizzle tapped a mournful rhythm against the window panes. I had come over with a determined purpose, to finally, bravely, start sorting through my mother's belongings in the attic. It was a task we had both been actively avoiding, a final frontier of our grief that we knew would be littered with landmines of memory. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Michael asked, his voice raspy from lack of use. He stood by the kitchen sink, staring out at the sodden backyard. "No," I answered honestly, pulling an old sweatshirt over my head, "but I don't think we'll ever be ready. We just have to do it." He nodded slowly, not turning around. "Just, be careful up there. A lifetime is stored in that attic." The pull-down ladder groaned in protest as I tugged the cord, a sound that was itself a memory from childhood. A puff of dust-filled warm air descended, carrying the unmistakable scent of aged paper, cedar, and forgotten things. I climbed up into the dim triangular space, the single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to retreat from my intrusion. It was a chaotic archive of our lives. Christmas decorations sat next to boxes of my high school textbooks. My old softball trophy was a dusty sentinel beside a broken lamp. And in the far corner, under the eaves, were my mother's things. Several boxes were neatly labeled in her precise handwriting. Winter clothes, photo albums, Elena's art projects. For an hour, I worked mechanically, creating piles, keep, donate, undecided. It was emotionally draining, but manageable. I was steeling myself, building up the courage to open the box I knew was there somewhere, the one that held her more personal effects, the things that weren't so easily categorized. And then I saw it, tucked not in a box, but hidden away behind a stack of my own tiny baby clothes, was a small, lacquered wooden chest. My breath hitched. I remembered this box. It had lived on the top shelf of her closet for as long as I could remember, a forbidden treasure. When I was little, I'd asked her what was inside. She had smiled a soft, private smile and said, "Just my dreams, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The wood was smooth and cool to the touch. It was locked with a small brass clasp. For a moment, I felt a surge of guilt, a feeling that I was trespassing into a sacred space she had never intended for me to see. But the need to feel closer to her, to understand some part of her that was lost to me, was overwhelming. And then a memory surfaced with crystal clarity. A tiny, ornate silver key, kept on her key ring, separate from the others. She'd called it her skeleton key for dreams. My heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrambled back down the ladder and went to the kitchen junk drawer, a graveyard of loose batteries, dead pens, and mystery keys. I sifted through them frantically, and there it was, nestled at the bottom, the tiny silver key. Climbing back into the attic felt like a final, fateful journey. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floorboards, the chest in my lap. The key felt cold and heavy in my sweating palm. With a prayer I didn't even know I was uttering, I fitted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, definitive click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were a few artifacts of a life lived. A string of faux pearls, a dried corsage from what I assumed was her senior prom, and a small envelope containing my first baby tooth. And beneath it all, lying flat, and unassuming, was a simple leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the edges soft. This was it, my mother's diary. The guilt returned, a sharp sting. This was the ultimate invasion of privacy. But the pull was magnetic, irresistible. This was her voice, her unedited thoughts, a direct line to the woman I missed so desperately it was a physical ache. I opened the cover. The pages were filled with her elegant looping script, a timeline of a life before me, before the stable, quiet life that she had built with Michael. I started reading from the beginning, about her dreams of being a painter, her arguments with her own parents, her first impressions of my steady, reliable father. It was sweet, nostalgic, a black and white photograph coming to life. I felt a smile touch my lips. This was the mother I knew. This was safe. But as I turned the pages, moving into the year I was conceived, the tone began to shift. The writing became more chaotic, the sentences more fragmented, filled with a restless angst. She wrote about feeling trapped, about a life laid out for her like a pre-drawn map. And then, for the first time, a new name appeared. A name that would become the axis upon which my entire world would spin. His name was Julian.
It's over. I ended it. I had to. The weight of the lies is crushing me. I look at Michael's kind, trusting face, and I feel like the worst kind of monster. I chose the safe harbor. I have to. The alternative is to burn everything down, and I am not that brave. Or perhaps I am a coward. Julian's face, the hurt in his eyes, I will carry it with me forever. I have extinguished the most brilliant light I have ever known. I could barely breathe. I was at the cliff's edge. I knew what was coming, and yet I was powerless to stop it. I forced myself to turn one more page. The entry was short, written in a shaky hand that was barely legible. I am pregnant. The two words screamed up from the page, stark and devastating. The following sentences were a frantic internal monologue of pure panic. The timing, it is a cruel cosmic joke. It could be Michael's. It could be Julian's. God, what have I done? What have I done? My selfishness has created a life, and I don't even know whose it is. I cannot tell Michael. It would destroy him. It would destroy everything. And Julian, he is gone. The storm has passed. I must pray. I must pray every minute of every day that this child is Michael's. I will be the best wife, the best mother. I will bury the secret so deep inside me that it will become a fossil. No one can ever know. For the sake of this child, for the sake of the good man I am marrying, this part of me must die. The diary fell from my numb fingers, hitting the dusty floorboards with a soft, final thud. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The carefully constructed narrative of my life, the story of Michael and Carol, their steady love, their planned-for daughter, shattered into a million jagged pieces. I wasn't my father's daughter. I was the living, breathing consequence of a passionate, forbidden affair. I was a question mark made of flesh and blood. The man downstairs, the man whose eyes I shared, whose stubbornness I inherited, whose love had been my bedrock, was a lie. And in that moment, sitting in the dust of my mother's hidden life, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The foundation was gone, and I was in free fall. The diary lay on the floor, where it had fallen, its open pages like a wound. For a long time, I didn't move. I sat frozen in the attic's dim, dusty silence, the words I had read etching themselves onto the back of my eyelids. It could be Michael's. It could be Julian's. I was no longer Elena, daughter of Michael and Carol. I was a living, breathing question mark, a secret made flesh, and the weight of it was crushing. The familiar contours of the attic, the shadowed angles of the roof, the ghost-like shapes of sheet-covered furniture seemed to warp and leer at me. This space, once a treasure trove of childhood memories, had become a tomb for the truth my mother had buried here. The scent of cedar, once so comforting, now felt funerary. Slowly, mechanically, I picked up the diary. The leather cover felt like skin, cold and lifeless. I closed it as if that could somehow contain the cataclysm within its pages. My limbs were heavy, moving through a thick, resistant atmosphere as I descended the pull-down ladder, each rung groaning under the weight of my new reality. My feet met the solid floor of the hallway below, but the world itself felt unsteady, tilting on a new, terrifying axis. I could hear the low, familiar murmur of the television from the living room. The sound was an anchor to the life I was about to destroy. I walked down the hallway, each step a conscious effort. The framed family photos on the walls seemed to mock me now, a triptych of lies. There we were, smiling at Disneyland, my father's arms around us both. There was my graduation, his face beaming with a pride that was based on a biological fallacy. Our shared smile, our matching squints, all of it was a cruel genetic coincidence. He was on the sofa, bathed in the cool blue glow of the sports channel. He wasn't really watching. He was just staring in the direction of the noise, a half-empty mug of coffee growing cold on the side table. This was his routine now, a way to fill the silent hours without her. In his slumped shoulders and the profound sadness in his posture, I saw the man who loved my mother with a steady, unwavering devotion, a devotion she had betrayed, and I was the permanent, living evidence of that betrayal. My shadow fell on him, and he looked up. The gentle, absent smile he reserved for me started to form on his lips. "Find anything good up there, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice a raspy echo of its former self. The words wouldn't come. They were lodged in my throat, a solid, painful mass. I could only stand there, a statue of guilt and devastation, holding the damned diary in my outstretched hands, as if it were a poisonous relic. My vision blurred with unshed tears. The air crackled with the unsaid. His smile faltered, then vanished completely. His eyes, the same shade of hazel as my own, flickered from my tear-streaked face to the book in my hands and back again. A deep crease of concern appeared between his brows. "Elena, what is it? What's wrong?" He leaned forward, his voice laced with a father's instinctual worry, the very instinct that was now tragically misplaced. I tried to speak, but all that emerged was a choked sob. I thrust the diary toward him, my arm trembling. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I finally whispered, the words tearing themselves from me. That word "Dad" felt like a lie, even as I said it. He took the journal from me, his movement slow and confused. His hands broad and capable, the hands that had taught me how to ride a bike and fix a leaky faucet, looked strangely clumsy holding the delicate book. He looked down at the open page, his expression one of pure bewilderment. He was trying to solve a puzzle, not knowing he was about to step on a landmine. I watched him read. I didn't just see it. I felt it. I saw the moment his brain began to process my mother's handwriting, to decipher the meaning behind the frantic script. His eyes, which had been scanning the page with mild confusion, stopped moving. They froze on a single line, a single phrase. The color, the little that was left in his grief-hollowed cheeks, drained away completely, leaving his face a ghastly ashen mask. His breathing hitched, a sharp, quiet intake of air that was more devastating than any scream. His shoulders, already stooped with sorrow, collapsed inwards as if he'd been physically struck. The light in his eyes, the warm, proud light that had always been there for me, even in his deepest grief, wasn't just dim. It was extinguished, utterly and completely, snuffed out by the words on the page. He was reading the obituary of his own life, of the family he thought he had. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the tinny, irrelevant commentary from the television. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. When he finally looked up from the diary, he didn't look at me with anger. He didn't look at me with hatred. He looked through me. His eyes were empty, hollowed out. The man I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger whose entire history had just been rewritten. All this time, I was living her lie. He breathed, his voice a hollow, broken thing, stripped of all emotion. It was the sound of total desolation. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the diary. He didn't demand an explanation. The truth was too absolute, too annihilating for such theatrics. With a slow, deliberate movement that was somehow more terrifying than any violent outburst, he placed the diary carefully, almost reverently, on the coffee table. He stood up, his movements stiff, like a much older man. He walked past me without a second glance, without a word. He didn't go to his room. He didn't go to the kitchen. He walked straight to the front door. I heard the soft click of the latch as he opened it,